Leo found himself anchored to the counter of his silent diner, his gaze lost in the web of cracks sprawling across the tired linoleum, searching for answers that simply weren't there. Outside, the neon sign that proudly declared the Starlight Diner buzzed and sputtered, a perfect reflection of his failing dream. This once thriving haven had become a casualty of progress, its loyal patrons lured away by the siren song of newer, more fashionable eateries that had sprung up, draining the lifeblood of his business year by year. He let out a long, slow breath, running a weary hand through his thinning hair. A menacing stack of unpaid bills sat on the counter, a silent monument to his failure, and a cold certainty settled in his gut. He had to sell. Yet even that felt like trying to climb a waterfall. Who in their right mind would invest in a dying diner in a forgotten corner of the city? As the first drops of rain began to whisper against the large plate-glass windows, Leo's eyes were drawn to the alley outside. Two shadows huddled there, almost swallowed by the deepening twilight and the relentless downpour. A man and a small girl, the child clutching a worn-out coat around her tiny body. They were a portrait of misery, their forms starkly outlined by the unsteady pulse of a nearby street lamp. Leo's initial impulse was to turn away, to shut them out. He had a mountain of his own troubles. He didn't need to carry the weight of strangers loitering by his property. But then a shiver racked the little girl's frame, and she pressed herself deeper into the man. Her father, he assumed. And something twisted in Leo's chest. Muttering a curse under his breath, he snatched an umbrella and pushed his way into the storm. "Hey!" His voice cut through the rain, sharp and sudden. "What are you two doing out here?" The man's head snapped up, his face a canvas of exhaustion and quiet surrender. "Just trying to get out of the rain," he answered, his voice a low rumble laced with a desperate edge. "We can leave if we're a problem." Leo hesitated, his hardened gaze softening as it fell upon the girl. Her eyes, wide and surprisingly hopeful, met his, and a sharp pang of guilt pierced his defenses. She couldn't be more than 10, and the way she clung to her father was a silent testament to their shared hardship. "Get inside," Leo said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them, surprising even himself. The man looked at him, startled. "Are you certain? We don't want to be any trouble." "Just for the night," Leo snapped, as if the harshness of his tone could convince himself it was the right thing to do. "Any longer out here and that kid is going to catch her death." He spun around and walked back into the diner, leaving the door slightly ajar, not waiting for a reply. A few moments later, the soft, hesitant sound of footsteps followed him. The warmth of the diner wrapped around the pair like a blanket as they stepped over the threshold. The man gently helped the girl out of her drenched coat, revealing a painfully thin frame in a faded dress that was clearly too big for her. Leo kept himself busy behind the counter, making a show of wiping it down, pretending not to see their profound discomfort. "Sit anywhere," he mumbled, gesturing vaguely with his rag. "There's coffee and water over there. Help yourselves." "Thank you," the man murmured, his gratitude a tangible presence in the quiet room. The girl, however, was far less shy. "Thank you so much, mister," she chirped, her voice a bright, clear bell that defied their bleak situation. "This is a really wonderful place." Leo just grunted, not wanting to get drawn into conversation. From the corner of his eye, he watched them slide into a booth. The man poured a cup of coffee with a slightly trembling hand, while the girl sat captivated by the rain as it streamed down the window pane. The hours drifted by in a comfortable silence. Leo occupied himself with cleaning and the dreaded paperwork, his eyes occasionally flicking over to the pair. The man, who introduced himself as Marcus, remained quiet, his posture wary but not hostile. The girl, Ilara, was a tiny storm of bright curiosity, peppering Leo with questions about the diner, about its past, about him. Leo found himself answering her, his usual gruffness melting away. He told her how he had opened this very place 2 decades ago, back when the neighborhood was full of life. He spoke of the regulars who had once filled every booth, their laughter echoing off the walls, and the late-night rushes that had pulsed with energy until the early morning. "Why did they stop coming?" Ilara asked, her brow crinkling with genuine concern. Leo paused, disarmed by her earnestness. "People change," he said at last, the words feeling heavy. Neighborhoods change. I suppose this place just isn't what it used to be. Ilara nodded with a solemnity that seemed far beyond her years, as if she understood the deep, unspoken truths of loss and time. As the night deepened, Leo began to see Marcus and Ilara differently. They weren't just faces in the alley, not just homeless wanderers. They were a father and daughter, bound together, holding on tight against a world that had tried to tear them apart. Their connection reminded him of his own daughter, Clara, though it had been a long, long time since he'd seen a smile like Ilara's on her face. When the old clock on the wall chimed midnight, Leo made a spontaneous decision. "You can use the storage room for the night," he said gruffly, his gaze fixed on a spot on the floor. "It's not much, but it's warm, and it's dry." Marcus looked up, utterly stunned. "We really couldn't impose—" "Just take it," Leo cut him off, his tone leaving no space for protest. "Thank you," Marcus said again, his voice thick with an emotion Leo couldn't name. Ilara beamed at Leo, her gratitude shining with more warmth and brilliance than the flickering neon sign outside. "You're the best, Mr. Leo." Leo waved her thanks away, retreating into the sanctuary of his small office. As he sat at his desk, staring at the looming mountain of bills, he couldn't get the image of Ilara's smile out of his head. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the crushing weight on his shoulders felt just a little bit lighter. But as he leaned back into his creaking chair, a nagging thought began to crawl into his mind. He had absolutely no idea what he had just invited into his life. The pale morning sun filtered through the diner's grimy windows, painting the empty booths in stripes of muted gold. Leo stood behind the counter clutching a cup of lukewarm coffee, his eyes fixed on the storage room door. Sleep had been a stranger to him, his mind a racetrack of doubts and regrets about letting Marcus and Ilara stay. When the door finally creaked open, Marcus emerged first, his movements cautious, his body tense as if expecting a confrontation. Behind him, Ilara appeared, a small beacon of boundless energy, her face immediately lighting up when she saw Leo. "Good morning, Mr. Leo," she sang out, practically skipping over to the counter. Leo offered a grunt in reply, his gaze remaining firmly on his coffee cup. "Morning?" Marcus approached with more hesitation, his voice low and apologetic. "Thank you again for letting us stay. It meant more than you know." Leo waved it away. "Don't mention it. Just try to stay out of the way today." Marcus nodded, understanding the unspoken rule. "Of course. We'll be out of your hair." But Ilara, it seemed, had entirely different plans. As Leo began his morning routine, setting up for the day, she became his shadow, a constant stream of questions trailing behind him. "How long have you owned this diner? Did you always dream of being a chef? Don't you ever get lonely in here all by yourself?" Leo sighed, his patience fraying at the edges. "Kid, don't you have something better to do?" Ilara tilted her head, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Not really. But I can help. I'm an expert at setting tables." Before Leo could protest, she had grabbed a stack of paper napkins and was darting between the booths, humming a bright, cheerful melody. In spite of himself, a small, reluctant smile touched Leo's lips. Marcus, meanwhile, kept a respectful distance, watching his daughter with a complicated mix of pride and worry. "She's always been like that," he said softly, seeming to read Leo's mind. "Just full of light, no matter what happens." Leo glanced over at Marcus, taking in the deep lines of exhaustion carved into his face. "How long have you two been on your own?" Marcus hesitated, his gaze falling to the floor. "A little over a year. It's been tough, but we get by." Leo didn't push for more, sensing the story was heavy with pain. He turned back to his work, his attention occasionally drawn to Ilara as she moved from table to table with a sense of purpose. As the morning crawled on, the diner remained a cavern of emptiness. A couple of regulars did shuffle in, their faces twisting with suspicion as they took in the sight of Marcus and Ilara. One of them, a burly construction worker named Gus, grumbled under his breath as he settled onto a stool at the counter. "What's with the new hires, Leo?" he asked, jerking a thumb in Marcus's direction. "They're just staying for a little while," Leo replied curtly, hoping to shut down the interrogation before it began. Gus snorted. Better keep an eye on your wallet. You never know with people like that. Leo's jaw clenched, but he held his tongue. He busied himself with the coffee machine, pretending he didn't feel the icy stares Gus was aiming at Marcus. Marcus, for his part, remained stoic, his focus entirely on Ilara. She had taken it upon herself to be Gus's personal waitress, refilling his coffee with a smile that never wavered, even in the face of the man's cold hostility. "Here you go, sir," she said with infectious cheer, placing the pot back on the warmer. Gus just mumbled something unintelligible, refusing to even look at her. Leo watched the exchange, a knot of discomfort tightening in his stomach. He knew Gus wasn't alone in his prejudices. He couldn't deny that similar thoughts had crossed his own mind not so long ago. But seeing Ilara's innocent kindness met with such open disdain stirred something new within him. A fierce, protective urge. By the time Gus finally left, a heavy silence had once again fallen over the diner. Marcus approached the counter, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of frustration. "Thanks for not saying anything." Leo frowned. What good would it have done? Guys like Gus, they don't change their minds just because you say a few words. Marcus nodded, his expression unreadable. Maybe, but it's still hard to just stand there and absorb it. Leo didn't have an answer for that, so he turned his attention back to the vast empty space of his diner. The day dragged on, uneventful yet thick with an unspoken tension. That evening, as Leo was getting ready to close, Marcus approached him again. "I know you've already done so much for us, but I'd like to help out. If you'll let me. I used to cook back when I had a steady job." Leo raised a skeptical eyebrow. "You're telling me you know your way around a kitchen?" A faint smile touched Marcus's lips. "I do. I could prove it, if you'd like." Leo hesitated, caught between his instinct to refuse and a growing curiosity. Finally, he let out a sigh. "Fine. You can make one dish. If it's any good, maybe we'll talk." Marcus nodded, already rolling up his sleeves. Deal." In the kitchen, Leo watched as Marcus moved with a practiced, fluid grace, selecting ingredients and working with a quiet, methodical focus. The aromas that soon filled the air were unlike anything Leo had ever created himself. They were rich, warm, and deeply enticing. When Marcus finally presented the finished dish, Leo took a bite, his skepticism warring with his senses. The flavors exploded on his tongue, a complex and beautiful symphony that left him, for a moment, utterly speechless. "Well?" Marcus asked, a hint of nervousness in his voice. Leo grunted, setting down his fork. "It's not bad." Marcus chuckled, recognizing the grudging praise for what it truly was. "Glad to hear it." That night, as Leo locked the front door, he couldn't shake the memory of that meal. For the first time in a very long time, he felt a flicker of something he had almost forgotten. Hope. Hope for the diner, and hope for the unlikely pair he had let into his life. But he also knew deep down that trust was a fragile thing, and the road ahead was going to be anything but easy. The low hum of the refrigerator and the quiet clink of utensils were the only sounds in the empty diner. As Leo stood behind the counter, flipping through a dusty notebook filled with forgotten recipes and hastily scribbled notes, the place felt different this morning. It was less like a tomb for a dying business and more like something slowly, cautiously, waking up. It wasn't busy, not by a long shot, but a new energy pulsed in the air, something he hadn't felt in years. Marcus had been up since dawn, cleaning tables and wiping down the windows until they gleamed. Ilara had appointed herself chief floor sweeper, her small body darting around the room with a focused determination that belied her size. Watching them, Leo felt a strange, unfamiliar pang of something that felt dangerously close to guilt. "Careful with that broom, kid," Leo called out. "You'll end up knocking something over." Ilara grinned at him, her eyes sparkling. "I'm a professional cleaner now, Mr. Leo. No accidents allowed." Leo just shook his head, unable to fight the small smile that tugged at the corners of his mouth. He turned his attention back to the counter just as the bell above the door chimed, announcing a customer. It was Gus. Leo stiffened, his hands tightening around the notebook. Gus stomped in as if he owned the place, his heavy work boots leaving faint, muddy tracks on the freshly mopped floor. "Morning, Leo." Gus's eyes immediately found Marcus, who was now carefully arranging silverware on the tables. "You still got him hanging around?" Leo's jaw tensed. "Yeah, he's helping out." Gus snorted, a harsh, ugly sound. "Helping? Or freeloading?" Before Leo could fire back a response, Ilara materialized beside him, holding her broom like a royal scepter. "My dad is not a freeloader," she said, her voice small but firm, ringing with absolute conviction. "He's working really, really hard." Gus's eyes narrowed, looking down at her with disdain. "Is that so?" Leo stepped in before the situation could ignite. "Look, Gus, if you're here to eat, grab a booth. Otherwise, you know where the door is." Gus scowled but slumped into a booth, clearly not ready to give up. Leo let out a slow breath, his eyes meeting Marcus's, who had frozen mid-motion. "It's fine," Marcus said quietly. "I'm used to it." Leo hated the sound of those words, the weary resignation in them, but he didn't press the issue. Instead, he focused on making Gus's coffee, trying to ignore the gnawing unease that was creeping up his spine. Later that day, Leo found Marcus in the kitchen, expertly rolling out a sheet of dough. The air was thick with the warm, comforting smell of spices, and Leo's stomach rumbled in spite of his mood. "What's this?" Leo asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Experimenting?" Marcus replied without looking up. "Figured if I'm going to be sticking around, I might as well try to add something new to the menu." Leo crossed his arms over his chest. "I didn't say you could change the menu." Marcus finally looked up, his expression calm but unyielding. "You also didn't say I couldn't." For a fleeting moment, Leo considered putting a stop to the whole thing. But then he saw Ilara at the counter, chatting animatedly with a couple of new customers who had wandered in. One of them was actually smiling at her, and Leo realized with a jolt that it was the first time he'd seen that particular booth occupied in months. He turned back to Marcus and gave a curt nod toward the oven. "Let's see if it's any good." When the dish was ready, Leo had to admit, though it pained him, that it wasn't just good. It was incredible. The flavors were bold and exciting without being overwhelming, and the presentation was something you'd expect to see in a high-end restaurant downtown. "It'll sell," Leo said finally, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. Marcus smirked. "You sound surprised." "I'm not," Leo lied, turning away to hide the twitch of a smile. Over the next few days, word of Marcus's cooking began to spread like wildfire. More people started to show up. Not a flood, but a steady trickle that gave Leo a fragile glimmer of hope. But not everyone was happy with the changes. One afternoon, a woman who had been a regular for years stood at the counter, staring at the menu with a pinched expression. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Where's the usual stuff?" Leo opened his mouth to explain, but Marcus beat him to it. "The old menu is still here," he said, his tone even and respectful. "We're just adding a few new options." The woman scoffed. "I'm not sure I like the direction this place is going." Leo bristled, but before he could say anything, Marcus took a step back. "Let me know if you change your mind," he said calmly. The woman turned and left without ordering. Leo stared after her, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "You can't just let people walk out like that." Marcus wiped his hands on a towel. "And you can't force them to stay either." Leo wanted to argue, but he couldn't deny the truth in those words. And the customers who did stay seemed to love the new food. And Ilara, always Ilara, was winning people over with her boundless, infectious enthusiasm. Still, the tension remained, a low hum beneath the surface of everything. One evening, after the last customer had gone, Leo sat at the counter while Marcus cleaned up. "I don't get you," Leo said finally. Marcus looked up. "What do you mean? You just take it." "The comments, the looks. You don't fight back." Marcus's expression darkened for a moment. "I've fought before. It doesn't always help." Leo frowned. "So what? You just let people walk all over you?" "No," Marcus said quietly, his voice resonating in the empty diner. "I pick my battles. And right now, my only battle is making sure my daughter has food to eat and a roof over her head. Everything else can wait." Leo didn't reply, but he found himself turning those words over in his mind long after Marcus and Ilara had disappeared into the storage room for the night. The next day, Leo made a decision. He printed new menus, featuring Marcus's dishes right alongside the old classics. He didn't make a big deal about it. He just did it. When Marcus saw them, he simply raised an eyebrow. "I thought you didn't want to change anything." Leo shrugged, avoiding his gaze. "I changed my mind." Marcus smiled, a real, genuine smile. "Thanks," Leo grunted. "Don't make me regret it." But as the day wore on, and more customers came in, some drawn by curiosity, others by the growing buzz about the food, Leo started to think that maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't. By the end of the week, the diner felt different. The air was lighter, the heavy tension slowly easing with each new, delicious dish that left the kitchen. And for the first time in a very long time, Leo didn't feel a sense of dread when he looked at the cash register at the end of the night. But he also knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that the real test was still to come. The steady hum of the refrigerator filled the empty diner as Leo leaned against the counter, the overhead lights casting harsh, sterile reflections on its polished surface. Outside, the streetlights flickered, their weak glow barely penetrating the thick, damp fog that had rolled in. Business had improved just slightly over the past week, enough to keep the lights on for now. But the knot of tension that had taken root in Leo's chest refused to dissolve. Marcus was in the kitchen, the sounds of washing dishes echoing softly, while Ilara wiped down tables with the same relentless enthusiasm she applied to every task. Leo glanced at them, his eyes lingering on Ilara's cheerful humming. She reminded him so much of his own daughter Clara back when she was younger, before things between them had become so complicated. The bell above the door jingled, its sharp sound cutting through the quiet. Leo straightened up, expecting a late customer, but his expression hardened when he saw who had walked in. It was Gus, the burly construction worker. He stomped inside, his boots leaving a trail of muddy prints on the clean floor. He didn't even bother to greet Leo, instead making a beeline for the counter. "You got a minute?" Gus's tone was sharp, and Leo's stomach sank. Leo glanced toward the kitchen, where Marcus's silhouette moved behind the pass-through window. "Yeah, what's up?" Gus leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I've been hearing things, Leo. People are talking about how this place has changed, and not in a good way." Leo stiffened. "What do you mean?" "You know exactly what I mean." Gus's eyes darted toward the kitchen. "You let one of them take over your kitchen, and now half the neighborhood is acting like this place isn't for them anymore." Leo felt his pulse quicken, his grip tightening on the counter's edge. "He's not taking over. He's helping. And he's a damn good cook." Gus snorted. "Doesn't matter how good he is. People don't feel comfortable here anymore. You're losing your regulars, Leo. Maybe it's time to rethink who you're letting hang around." Leo's anger flared hot in his chest, but before he could unleash it, Ilara appeared at his side, her bright smile a stark contrast to the thick tension in the air. "Hi, Mr. Gus. Want some coffee?" Gus barely glanced at her. "Not today, kid." Ilara's smile faltered for a second, but she quickly recovered, darting back to her tables. Leo watched her go, his chest tightening. "She's just a kid, Gus," Leo said, his voice low and dangerous. "Marcus is just trying to take care of her." "Yeah?" Gus stepped closer. "And what about you? You're trying to keep this place alive, right? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're letting it die." Leo didn't answer. He couldn't. Later that night, long after Marcus and Ilara had retired to the storage room, Leo sat alone in the silent diner, replaying Gus's words over and over in his mind. He hated to admit it, but Gus wasn't entirely wrong. Business had changed. Sure, there were some new faces, but some of the old regulars, the ones who had kept the place afloat for years, had stopped coming in altogether. Was he making a huge mistake? The thought gnawed at him, a relentless, biting pest. But every time he tried to convince himself to cut ties with Marcus, he remembered Ilara's smile. The next morning, Leo found Marcus in the kitchen, carefully slicing vegetables with a practiced, rhythmic precision. "We need to talk," Leo said, leaning against the doorway. Marcus set down the knife and wiped his hands on a towel. "What's wrong?" Leo hesitated, then let the words tumble out in a rush. "Some of the regulars. They're not happy about you being here. They think I'm changing the place too much." Marcus's expression hardened, but he didn't seem surprised. "And what do you think?" Leo rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding his gaze. I think I need this place to survive. Marcus's shoulders tensed. And you think I'm hurting it? I didn't say that, Leo snapped. But the defensiveness in his tone was a clear betrayal. Marcus exhaled slowly, his eyes steady and unwavering. I get it. You don't know if you can trust me. And maybe your customers don't either. But I've been through this before, Leo. I've lost jobs, good jobs, because people didn't want someone who looks like me working in their kitchens. Leo frowned. What do you mean? Marcus leaned against the counter, his voice dropping to a quieter, more painful register. I used to be a sous chef at a fancy restaurant downtown. I was good. Damn good. But the owners, they didn't like that their image didn't match the guy running the kitchen. They started cutting my hours, giving my dishes to other chefs. Eventually, they found an excuse to let me go. Said I wasn't a team player. Leo felt a sharp pang of guilt. I didn't know. Marcus shrugged, a gesture of weary resignation. Didn't think you'd care. The words stung, but Leo knew he couldn't argue with them. That afternoon, a group of teenagers started loitering outside the diner, their shouts and laughter grating on Leo's already frayed nerves. He didn't pay them much attention until he heard a loud, sickening crash. He rushed outside to find one of the large front windows shattered, a brick lying on the ground amidst the glittering shards of glass. The kids scattered, their mocking laughter echoing down the empty street. Marcus appeared in the doorway, Ilara peeking out from behind him. What happened? Marcus asked, his voice tight. Leo just shook his head, his jaw clenched. Nothing. Just some punks. But as he stared at the broken glass, he couldn't shake the sinking, terrifying feeling that it wasn't random at all. The vandalism was only the beginning. Over the next few days, graffiti appeared on the walls, ugly slurs and insults that made Leo's stomach churn. Customers started whispering, and the tension in the diner grew thicker, more suffocating, with each passing day. Marcus tried to keep his head down, to ignore it, but Leo could see the strain wearing on him. Ilara stopped smiling as much, her usual bright energy dimmed by the hostile stares and muttered comments. Finally, Leo snapped. He stood in the middle of the diner one afternoon, his voice booming through the suddenly silent room. If you've got a problem with how I run this place, you know where the door is. But if you're here to eat, then sit down and act like decent human beings. The room fell silent. Marcus stared at Leo, a flicker of genuine surprise in his eyes. Ilara beamed. Go, Mr. Leo. That night, Leo locked up the diner and sat down across from Marcus. I'm not kicking you out, Leo said firmly, but I need to know you're in this for the long haul. Marcus met his gaze, his eyes unwavering. I'm not going anywhere. Leo nodded. Good. As they sat in the quiet, Leo realized something fundamental had shifted. For the first time, he wasn't just fighting to save his diner. He was fighting for something bigger, for a chance to prove that change was possible, even in a place like this. And he wasn't fighting alone. The diner's broken window had been hastily patched with a large sheet of plywood, but the scars it left ran much deeper than the jagged edges of the glass. Leo stood behind the counter, watching Marcus and Ilara through the pass-through window to the kitchen. The tension that had been building for the past week still hung in the air, thick and suffocating like the smell of burnt coffee. Ilara hummed softly to herself as she wiped down the tables, her energy a fragile, muted echo of its former brightness. Marcus moved through the kitchen with his usual practiced precision, but Leo could see the stiffness in his shoulders, the way he carefully avoided meeting Leo's gaze. Leo didn't blame him. The graffiti, the broken window, the constant hostile stares from customers who came in just to gawk at the man cooking in the kitchen, it was enough to break anyone's spirit. But Marcus hadn't broken. If anything, he seemed more determined, more fiercely focused, and that raw determination was starting to rub off on Leo. It was nearing closing time when the front door swung open, and a group of men strode inside. Leo recognized them immediately. Local contractors who used to grab lunch there between jobs. They weren't regulars anymore, not since Marcus had started cooking, and their presence now felt deliberate, almost menacing. The tallest of the group, a man named Vince, leaned against the counter, his eyes sweeping over the diner with a look of disdain. Heard you had some trouble here, Leo. Leo tightened his grip on the rag he was using to clean the counter. Nothing we couldn't handle. Vince smirked. Is that so? Because it looks to me like this place is falling apart. Leo felt his pulse quicken. But before he could respond, Marcus stepped out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. Can I help you gentlemen with something? Vince's smirk widened. Yeah, you can help by packing up your things and leaving. This neighborhood doesn't need charity cases pretending to be chefs. Ilara froze mid-step, her eyes darting between her father and the men. Leo saw the raw fear in her face, and something inside him finally snapped. That's enough, Leo said, his voice low but firm, resonating with a new authority. You're in my diner, and if you can't treat people with respect, you can leave. Vince's smirk vanished. Are you serious? Dead serious, Leo said, stepping out from behind the counter. You want to insult someone, do it somewhere else. For a tense moment, it seemed like Vince might push back, but then he just shrugged and turned to leave, the others following close behind him. As the door swung shut, Leo let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Marcus's voice broke the heavy silence. Thanks. Leo met his gaze. Don't thank me. Just keep cooking. Later that night, as Leo locked up, he found Marcus sitting at one of the tables, staring at the plywood that covered the broken window. Can't sleep? Leo asked, pulling out a chair and sitting down. Marcus shook his head. Too much on my mind. Leo nodded. Yeah, same here. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The low hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, a familiar grounding rhythm in the otherwise still diner. Finally, Marcus broke the quiet. I'm not going to let them scare me off. Leo looked at him. Good. Because I need you here. Marcus's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't say anything. Leo leaned back in his chair. This place, it's been my entire life for a long time. But lately I've been wondering if that's enough. Watching you and Ilara, seeing how hard you're willing to fight for her. It's made me think, maybe it's time I started fighting too. Marcus studied him for a moment before nodding slowly. Then let's fight. The next morning, Leo and Marcus got to work. Marcus focused on the kitchen, refining the new dishes he'd added to the menu, creating flavors that were bold and unforgettable. Leo handled the front of the house, talking to customers, making them feel welcome, and making sure Ilara had something to do to keep her busy and her spirits up. Word began to spread about the diner's transformation. People started coming in, drawn by a mix of curiosity and the growing rumors about the new chef and his unusual, delicious menu. But the vandalism didn't stop. One evening, Leo arrived to find the diner's exterior spray-painted with ugly racial slurs. Ilara burst into tears when she saw it, and Marcus's face darkened with a cold, contained anger. Leo clenched his fists. We're cleaning this up. Tonight. They worked late into the night, scrubbing the hateful words off the walls and repainting the exterior. By the time they were finished, their clothes were stained with paint and sweat, but the diner looked clean and welcoming once again. Marcus leaned against the wall, wiping his forehead. They're not going to stop. Leo nodded, his jaws set. Then neither will we. The next day, Leo decided to take an even bigger risk. We're hosting a community dinner, he announced, as Marcus was prepping ingredients in the kitchen. Marcus looked up, confused. A what? A dinner. Free meals for anyone who shows up. We'll show this neighborhood what we're really about. Marcus hesitated. We can't afford that. Leo grinned, a flash of his old confidence returning. We can't afford not to. The community dinner was a huge gamble, but it paid off. People came, some out of simple curiosity, others because they genuinely wanted to support the diner. Marcus worked tirelessly in the kitchen, a whirlwind of motion and skill, while Leo moved from table to table making sure everyone was taken care of. By the end of the night, the heavy, oppressive tension that had hung over the diner for weeks seemed to finally lift. People lingered, chatting and laughing, and Leo caught glimpses of real, genuine hope in their faces. But not everyone was happy. Vince showed up near the end of the night, leaning against the doorframe with a sour, bitter expression on his face. This doesn't change anything, he said, his voice laced with contempt. Leo didn't even bother to respond. Instead, he turned back to the customers, his focus unwavering. As the last guests finally left, Marcus emerged from the kitchen, his apron stained but his face glowing with a tired satisfaction. "We did it," he said, his voice full of wonder. Leo nodded. "Yeah, we did." Ilara ran up to them, beaming. "Mr. Leo, that was amazing. Can we do it again?" Leo laughed. "We'll see." That night, as Leo closed up the diner, he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Pride. But he also knew the fight wasn't over. The graffiti, the stares, the whispers, they were all reminders of how much work still lay ahead. And yet, as he locked the door and glanced back at Marcus and Ilara, he felt something else too. Hope. The persistent buzz of the diner's neon sign cut through the early morning haze as Leo stood at the counter, scribbling numbers into a worn-out ledger. The faint, comforting scent of coffee and baked goods lingered in the air, but beneath it, an undercurrent of tension still pulsed, a low, steady hum. The community dinner had been a victory, a significant one. But Leo knew it was only the first step in a much longer battle. He looked toward the kitchen, where Marcus was already hard at work, the clatter of pots and the steady, rhythmic chop of a knife against a cutting board filling the quiet space. Across the room, Ilara was setting out napkins and silverware, humming to herself as she arranged each table with meticulous, careful precision. For the first time in weeks, the diner actually felt alive. Yet Leo couldn't shake the unnerving feeling that it was all balanced on a knife's edge. Just one wrong move away from toppling over. Marcus stepped out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. "We're low on flour and eggs," he said, his voice calm but with a slight edge of worry. "I can make it through today, but we'll need more by tomorrow." Leo grimaced. "I'll figure it out." Marcus nodded, but Leo could tell he wasn't convinced. Supplies cost money, and money was still incredibly tight, despite the recent uptick in customers. The damage done by weeks of vandalism and lost business wasn't something that could be easily undone. The bell above the door jingled, and both men turned to see who had entered. It was Nina, a local reporter who had stopped by the community dinner. She smiled warmly as she stepped inside, holding a notepad and pen. "Leo Marcus," she said cheerfully. "Mind if I ask a few follow-up questions about the dinner?" Leo glanced at Marcus, who just shrugged. "Sure," Leo said, forcing a smile. "What do you want to know?" Nina took a seat at the counter, flipping open her notepad. "Word around town is that your dinner was a huge hit. People are saying it felt like the old neighborhood again. Was that the goal?" Leo hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. We wanted to remind people what this place used to be. A place where everyone felt welcome." Nina jotted down some notes. "And what about the changes to the menu? I hear Marcus's cooking is a big part of the draw now." Leo glanced at Marcus, then back at Nina. "He's brought something new to the table, literally. People seem to like it." Marcus smirked. "Glad to hear it." Nina's smile widened. "It's a great story, Leo. A diner fighting to survive, bringing the community together. It's the kind of thing people need to hear right now." Leo shifted uncomfortably. "We're just trying to keep the lights on." Nina didn't look convinced, but she didn't press the issue. Instead, she thanked them for their time and promised to send over a copy of the article once it was published. After she left, Marcus leaned against the counter. "You think it'll help?" Leo shrugged. "Couldn't hurt." But even as he said the words, a flicker of doubt lingered. He'd seen what happened when things started going well, how quickly people tried to tear it all down. By midday, the diner was busier than it had been in months. Customers filled the booths and tables, their lively conversations mingling with the clatter of dishes and the sizzle of food on the grill. Leo moved through the crowd with a practiced, easy grace, taking orders and refilling drinks. Marcus worked non-stop in the kitchen, his focus sharp and unwavering. But as the day wore on, Leo noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere. A group of teenagers began to linger near the entrance, their laughter sharp and mocking. Leo recognized a few of them, kids from the same crowd that had vandalized the diner weeks earlier. One of them leaned against the door frame, smirking as he watched Marcus through the pass-through window. "Nice place you've got here," the boy said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Looks real. Inclusive." Leo stepped forward, blocking the view. "You need something?" The boy shrugged. "Just looking." "Well, look somewhere else." The boy's smirk faltered, but he didn't argue. Instead, he turned and walked out, his friends following close behind. Leo exhaled slowly, his hands trembling slightly. That evening, after the diner had closed, Leo sat at one of the booths with Marcus and Ilara. The lights were dim, and the faint, steady hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. "We need to do more," Leo said finally. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "More? We can't just rely on what we've done so far. People are paying attention now. We need to keep that momentum going." Marcus frowned. "And how do we do that?" Leo leaned forward, a new energy in his voice. "We make this place stand out. Special events, themed nights, whatever it takes to keep people coming back." Marcus hesitated. "That's risky." "So is doing nothing." Ilara piped up, her voice bright with excitement. "We could have music nights. People love music." David chuckled. "You just want an excuse to sing, don't you?" Ilara grinned. "Maybe." Leo tapped his fingers against the table, considering the idea. "Music, huh? It's not a bad place to start." Over the next few days, the diner transformed. Leo and Marcus worked together to create a schedule of events. Live music, trivia nights, and themed dinners. Ilara made colorful posters to hang in the windows, and Nina helped to spread the word through her article. The response was immediate. Customers started showing up, not just for the food, but for the experience. The diner buzzed with a new, vibrant energy, and for the first time, Leo began to truly believe they might actually make it. But the threats hadn't gone away. One evening, as Leo was closing up, he found a note taped to the door. "You don't belong here." Leo's stomach dropped. He tore the note down and shoved it into his pocket, but the hateful words lingered. The next morning, Marcus found him in the kitchen, staring at the crumpled piece of paper. "We should call the police," Marcus said. Leo shook his head. "And what? Wait for them to do nothing?" "No, we handle this ourselves." Marcus frowned. "How?" Leo looked up, a fierce determination hardening his features. "We keep going. We show them we're not afraid." Marcus nodded slowly. "Okay, let's do it." That night, the diner hosted its first live music event. Ilara convinced Marcus to let her sing, and by the end of the night, the entire room was clapping and cheering. Leo watched from the counter, a rare, genuine smile tugging at his lips. For the first time in weeks, he felt like they were winning. But he also knew, with a cold certainty, that the fight was far from over. The echo of applause lingered in the air long after the last customer had departed, and it felt as though Ilara's voice still resonated through the walls, her youthful energy infusing every corner of the space. Leo leaned against the counter, watching as Marcus locked the front door. "That went better than I expected," Leo admitted, his voice rough with emotion. Marcus smiled, the deep tension that had inhabited his shoulders for weeks finally beginning to ease. "She's got a gift, that's for sure." Leo nodded, but his thoughts were already racing ahead. The evening had been a resounding success, perhaps too much of one. As the crowd had poured in, Leo couldn't help but notice the sharp glances and hostile whispers from a few familiar faces. Not everyone had come to support the diner's revival. Some had come to judge, to wait for the whole fragile enterprise to fall apart. "Did you see Vince?" Leo asked, his voice low. Marcus's expression darkened. "Yeah, he didn't look happy." "No," Leo agreed. "He didn't." Marcus sighed, wiping down the already clean counter. "You think he's going to try something again?" Leo stared out the window, where the dim glow of the streetlights barely touched the deep shadows. "I think he already is." The next day brought a strange mix of soaring optimism and a brewing storm of tension. The diner opened early, the rich smell of coffee and fresh pastries drawing in customers almost as soon as the open sign flickered to life. Word about the music night had spread, and regulars were already asking about the next event. But not everyone was there for the food. Vince returned, this time with a few of his cronies in tow. They claimed a booth in the corner, their cold eyes following Marcus's every move. Leo maintained his composure, but the weight of their hostile presence pressed down on his chest. Ilara noticed it too. She leaned in close to Leo as he poured her a glass of milk. "They don't like us, do they?" Leo froze, then forced a smile. "Don't worry about them, kid. They're just curious." Ilara didn't look convinced, But she didn't press the issue, instead turning her focus back to her coloring book, her crayon strokes slow and deliberate. Marcus emerged from the kitchen with a tray of food, his steps steady but his body rigid with tension. As he passed Vince's table, one of the men muttered something vile under his breath. Marcus didn't react, but Leo saw the flicker of raw anger in his eyes. Leo walked over, his voice sharp. "Everything okay over here?" Vince leaned back, smirking. "Sure, Leo, just admiring the new chef. You don't see talent like that every day." Leo's patience finally snapped. "If you're here to eat, order something. Otherwise, get out." Vince's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, hard stare. "You really think you're going to turn this place around with him in the kitchen?" "People don't forget, Leo. They don't forget who belongs and who doesn't." Leo stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "You're right. People don't forget, and neither will I." Vince stood, towering over Leo. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed like the situation was about to spiral into violence. But then Marcus stepped forward, placing a calming hand on Leo's shoulder. "It's not worth it," David said quietly. Vince laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Listen to your cook, Leo. He knows his place." Leo watched them leave, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. That night, the diner's windows were smashed again. Leo arrived early the next morning to find the glass shattered, glittering shards scattered across the floor like cruel diamonds. The walls were covered in freshly sprayed paint. More slurs, more insults that burned into his vision. Marcus arrived minutes later, his face hardening into a mask of cold fury as he took in the scene of destruction. Elara trailed behind him, her eyes wide with fear. Leo knelt beside her, his voice steady. "It's okay, kid. We'll fix it." But she didn't look convinced. They spent the entire day cleaning up, replacing the glass, and scrubbing the hateful words from the walls. Customers stopped by to offer help, their support a small comfort. But Leo could feel the tension simmering just beneath the surface of the neighborhood. By evening, a bone-deep exhaustion weighed on all of them, but the diner was back in order. Marcus sat at one of the booths, staring at the freshly repainted walls. "They're not going to stop," he said finally, his voice flat. Leo sank into the seat across from him. "Then we won't either." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You really think we can win this?" Leo nodded. "We already are." The next event at the diner drew an even larger crowd. This time, it wasn't just locals. Nina's article had attracted media attention, and a few reporters showed up to cover the story. Marcus worked tirelessly in the kitchen, a whirlwind of culinary creation, while Elara ran drinks and greeted customers with a smile that seemed to defy the chaos of the past few days. Leo watched her, his chest tightening with a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long, long time. Pride. But Vince wasn't finished. Halfway through the night, he appeared in the doorway with his usual group of men. This time he didn't sit down. He just stood there watching. Leo approached him, his voice calm but firm. "You're not welcome here." Vince smirked. "Can't stop people from standing on a public sidewalk, Leo." Leo took a step closer. "Maybe not, but I can make sure everyone in here knows exactly what kind of person you are." Vince's smirk faltered, but he didn't back down. "This isn't over." Leo watched him leave, his shoulders tight with tension. By the end of the night, the diner was quiet again. Marcus sat at the counter staring into his coffee. "You think they'll come back?" he asked. Leo nodded. "Probably." Marcus sighed. "I can't keep putting Elara through this." Leo leaned forward. "You're not. She's tougher than you think." Marcus looked over at Elara, who was asleep in one of the booths, her head resting on a stack of napkins. "I hope you're right." The following week, the community rallied around the diner in a way that stunned Leo. Customers showed up in droves, some bringing supplies, others just offering words of encouragement and support. But the threats didn't stop. Notes appeared on the door, and anonymous, hateful phone calls came late at night. Leo and Marcus refused to give in. One evening, Nina returned, this time with a camera crew. "We're doing a feature," she said. "People need to see this." Marcus hesitated, but Leo nodded. "Let's do it." The interview aired the next day, and the response was overwhelming. Donations poured in, and the diner saw more customers than ever before. By the end of the week, Leo stood outside, watching the happy, bustling crowd inside the diner. Marcus joined him, wiping his hands on a towel. "You were right," Marcus said quietly. "We're winning." Leo smiled. "Not done yet." But as they turned to go back inside, Leo couldn't shake the feeling that the fight wasn't over. Not yet. Leo stood outside the diner as the early morning sun cast long, hopeful shadows across the sidewalk. The windows gleamed, freshly cleaned and, for the first time in weeks, completely intact. Inside, the familiar hum of activity had already begun. Marcus prepping in the kitchen, Ilara setting tables, and the low murmur of early customers filtering in through the glass. For the first time in months, the diner felt steady. Not safe, perhaps, but stable, as if a foundation had finally been laid, one that wouldn't crack no matter how much pressure was applied. Leo's gaze drifted up to the newly painted sign above the door. It still read, "The Starlight Diner," but the letters were sharper, brighter. The name hadn't changed, but the place had. And so had he. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside, and Ilara's voice rang out from across the room. "Morning, Mr. Leo." Leo smiled, her cheerfulness as infectious as ever. "Morning, Ilara." Marcus appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. "We're out of onions again," he said with a hint of mock frustration, though his eyes held none of the deep tension they had in the past. Leo shook his head. "I'll grab some later. Don't worry about it." Marcus nodded, disappearing back into the kitchen. Watching him go, Leo marveled at how far they had come. A few months ago, Marcus had been just another anonymous face in the alley outside, and now he moved through the diner with the easy confidence of someone who belonged there. Because he did. Leo turned to Ilara, who was meticulously arranging salt and pepper shakers on the tables. "How'd you sleep, kid?" "Great," Ilara beamed. "Dad and I were talking about maybe getting a real apartment soon." Leo raised an eyebrow. "Oh, yeah?" Ilara nodded eagerly. "Yep. Dad says we're finally saving enough to start looking. He said it'll have a real kitchen, and maybe even a room just for me." Leo felt an unexpected pang in his chest, a strange mix of pride and something that felt a lot like sadness. He wanted this for them more than anything. They deserved it. But he also knew, with a certainty that surprised him, how much he would miss having them around. "That's great, Ilara," he said, forcing a smile. "You'll have to invite me over when you find a place." "Deal," she said, holding out her pinky. Leo laughed and hooked his own pinky around hers. The moment was interrupted by the bell above the door. Leo turned to see Nina walk in, her camera bag slung over one shoulder. "Morning, Leo," she said, her tone light. "Busy already?" "Not too bad," Leo replied. "What brings you in?" Nina grinned. "You, actually. The article's been getting a lot of attention. People want a follow-up." Leo raised an eyebrow. "A follow-up? We're just running a diner, not saving the world." Nina's grin widened. "Maybe not. But people love the story. It's about resilience, second chances, stuff that gives people hope." Leo glanced toward the kitchen, where Marcus was shouting orders to Ilara, who darted past with a tray of glasses. Hope. Yeah, that sounded about right. Later that afternoon, as the lunch rush finally died down, Leo and Marcus had a chance to catch their breath. They sat in one of the booths, their plates half-eaten and their coffee cups nearly empty. "You really think this is it?" Marcus asked, gesturing towards the bustling diner. "That we've made it?" Leo shrugged. "We're still here, aren't we?" Marcus smiled, but it faded quickly. "I've been thinking about what's next," he said carefully. "For me and Ilara." Leo set down his coffee cup. "Yeah, we're looking at apartments. It's time we found someplace permanent." Leo nodded slowly. "You should. She deserves that." Marcus hesitated. "But I don't want to leave this place behind." "I was thinking, maybe we make this official. I stay on as your partner. We split the work and the profits." Leo blinked, completely caught off guard. The thought had crossed his own mind, but hearing Marcus say it out loud made it real. "Are you serious?" Tom asked. Marcus nodded, his expression as serious as Leo had ever seen it. "As serious as I've ever been." Leo leaned back, letting the idea settle in. He'd spent years running this place on his own, and the thought of sharing it, of trusting someone else to care as much as he did, should have terrified him. But it didn't. "Let's do it," Leo said, and Marcus's face lit up with a profound, heartfelt relief. Over the next few weeks, everything started falling into place. The diner officially reopened under shared ownership, and Leo couldn't help but laugh when Marcus insisted on adding his name to the sign. "Leo and Marcus's Starlight Diner." The neighborhood responded with overwhelming support. Customers poured in, drawn not just by the incredible food, but by the story behind it. A story of struggle, redemption, and community. And through it all, Leo watched as Marcus and Ilara finally began to build the life they had been dreaming of for so long. One evening, as the last customers trickled out, Marcus approached Leo with a nervous smile. "Ilara wanted me to tell you something," Marcus said. Leo glanced toward the booth where Ilara sat, grinning from ear to ear. "What's that?" Marcus hesitated, then smiled. "She says she's decided to invite you to dinner. At the new apartment." Leo laughed, the sound echoing through the empty diner, full and genuine. "I'll be there." Months passed, and the diner continued to thrive. Nina's articles had turned it into a local landmark, and Marcus's cooking had earned a reputation that drew people from all across the city. But for Leo, the real success was something much simpler. The way the diner had become a home again. Not just for him, but for everyone who walked through the door. And as he stood behind the counter one evening, watching Marcus and Ilara laugh with a table of customers, he realized something else. This wasn't just a diner anymore. It was a family.